This is HOA catastrophe. Let me set the scene fast. I am standing in my side yard in Seattle, Washington, staring at a wooden survey stake I paid $200 to have planted, and Julie Phillips is screaming at me from 3 feet away. This is not a fence. It is an encroachment. That is what she keeps saying. She is the social committee chair for the Brookhaven Greens Reserve Association, and she showed up the second the surveyor drove away. She is holding a laminated notice template with blank spaces she fills in by hand. She already wrote my address and today's date in blue ink. She is wearing a purple windbreaker, a blue bucket hat, and a tiny body camera clipped to her collar that she keeps forgetting is recording her too. I am a route driver for a FedEx-style delivery company, and I cannot afford tow delays or missed custody time because of HOA hearings. I moved here 6 months ago because the rent was cheaper and the commute was manageable. The HOA seemed normal at first. Then I tried to put up a fence. Julie is pointing at the stake like it is radioactive. You cannot plant that here. You need HOA approval. You need a survey. You need a permit. You need to submit drawings. You need to wait for the board to vote. I tell her, I already got a survey. That is why the stake is here. She says it does not matter. The HOA rules say I have to submit plans first. I pull out my phone and show her the email I sent 3 weeks ago with the contractor quote and a site diagram. She glances at it for half a second and says it is not the right format. She wants a notarized plot map with measurements in feet and inches, not a contractor sketch. I ask her where that rule is written. She taps the laminated notice in her hand. It is right here. I look closer. The notice says violation notice in normal-sized letters at the top, but the rest is blank except for the blue ink she just added. I ask her what the violation is. She says trespass. I tell her the stake is on my property. She says I do not know that until the HOA approves the survey. I tell her the surveyor is a licensed professional hired by the title company. She says the title company does not manage the HOA. Your paperwork is cute. Mine has a letterhead. She waves the laminated template again. I feel my jaw tighten. I have custody of my daughter every other weekend, and the hearing schedule Julie loves to weaponize always lands on Friday nights. I cannot risk missing a single visit because I am stuck in some HOA compliance meeting. I take a breath and tell her I am putting up a fence to keep my yard private. She smiles. Then, you should have thought about that before you bought in Brookhaven Greens Reserve. We have rules. I ask her which rule says I cannot put up a fence. She says it is not about whether I can put up a fence. It is about the process. I have to submit plans, wait for approval, hire an HOA-approved contractor, and pay a deposit. I ask how much the deposit is. She says it depends on the scope. I ask what the scope is. She says the board will decide after they review the plans. I ask when the next board meeting is. She says it is tonight, but the agenda is full. I will have to wait until next month. I tell her next month does not work. I already scheduled the contractor for next week. She shrugs. Then you will have to reschedule. I tell her I already paid the deposit. She says that is not the HOA's problem. I look at the survey stake. It is barely 10 inches tall. It has a little orange flag tied to the top. It marks the corner of my property according to the county records and the title survey. Julie is acting like I planted a missile launcher. I ask her if she has ever filed a complaint about anyone else's fence. She says that is not relevant. I ask her how many fences are in the neighborhood. She says at least 40. I ask her if all of them went through the HOA approval process. She says she does not have time to answer hypothetical questions. I tell her it is not hypothetical. I can see 3 fences from where I am standing. She says those fences were grandfathered in. I ask her when the rule changed. She says it has always been the rule. I ask her why the HOA did not enforce it before. She says they did. I just did not live here. I tell her I have been here 6 months, and I have never seen a single fence violation notice on anyone else's door. She says that is because everyone else follows the rules. I am about to respond when my phone buzzes. It is a text from my neighbor Marcus. He lives 2 doors down, and he has a doorbell camera that covers part of my side yard. The text says, Dude, check your cam, she was here last night, messing with your stuff. I look at Julie. She is still holding the laminated notice. I ask her if she came onto my property last night. She says she does not have to answer that. I tell her Marcus has video. She says doorbell cameras are not admissible in HOA hearings. I tell her they are admissible in court. She laughs. You are not going to take this to court over a fence. I tell her I will if I have to. She says good luck affording a lawyer. I tell her I do not need a lawyer to file a complaint with the management company. She says the management company works for the HOA, not for me. I tell her I pay dues. She says everyone pays dues. That does not make me special. I feel the key fob in my hand. I have to leave for my route in 30 minutes. I cannot stand here arguing all day. I tell Julie I am putting up the fence next week. She says if I do, the HOA will fine me. I ask how much. She says $500 a day until I remove it. I ask her where that penalty is written. She says it is in the bylaws. I ask her to show me. She says the bylaws are on file with the management company. I ask her for the management company's number. She says it is on the HOA website. I tell her the HOA website has been down for 3 weeks. She says that is not her problem. I ask her whose problem it is. She says the webmaster is a volunteer, and he is busy. I ask her who the webmaster is. She says it is confidential. I tell her I am a homeowner, and I have a right to know who manages the HOA. She says I have a right to request information through the proper channels. I ask what the proper channels are. She says written request to the board. I ask where I send the written request. She says the management company. I tell her I do not have the management company's contact information because the website is down. She says I should have gotten it when I closed. I tell her I did, but the phone number is disconnected. She says that is odd. I tell her it is more than odd. It is suspicious. Julie stares at me. Then she smiles again. You think you are smart. I have been on this board for 8 years. I know every trick. I watched her pile on threats. Because that is exactly what I needed her to do. I am not smart. I am just patient. And I am very good at documenting things. I pull out my phone again and open the voice memo app. I have been recording since she started yelling. She does not notice. She is too busy filling in another blank on her laminated template. She writes my name in blue ink. She writes the date. She writes the word trespass in the violation field. Then she peels a sticker off the back and presses it onto my front door. I tell her she cannot put that on my door without HOA board approval. She says she does not need approval. She is the compliance officer. I tell her the bylaws say the compliance officer has to be elected. She says she was elected. I ask when. She says it is in the minutes. I ask to see the minutes. She says they are not public. I tell her HOA meeting minutes are required to be public in Washington State. She says that only applies to official meetings. I ask what an official meeting is. She says a meeting where the board votes. I ask if the board voted to make her compliance officer. She says yes. I ask if there is a record. She says yes. I ask where. She says in the minutes. I tell her we are going in circles. Julie walks back toward the street. She stops at the edge of my driveway and turns around. I am filing a formal complaint. If that fence goes up without approval, the HOA will place a lien on your property. I ask her how the HOA can place a lien without a hearing. She says the bylaws allow emergency enforcement. I ask what the emergency is. She says encroachment is a safety issue. I ask who's in danger. She says the neighbors. I look around. The nearest neighbor is 50 feet away, and there is nothing between us except grass. I ask Julie how a fence in my side yard is a safety issue for someone 50 feet away. She says it blocks sightlines. I ask what sightlines. She says traffic sightlines. I tell her the fence is not near the street. She says it does not matter. The board has discretion. I tell her discretion does not mean ignoring the law. She says the HOA is not ignoring the law. It is enforcing the covenants. I ask her to show me the covenant that says I cannot put up a fence without approval. She says it is in Section 12. I ask her what Section 12 says. She says it says homeowners must maintain the aesthetic integrity of the community. I tell her a fence does not violate aesthetic integrity. She says the board decides what violates aesthetic integrity. I ask if the board has written standards. She says no. I ask how I am supposed to comply with a rule that has no written standards. She says I use common sense. I laugh. I cannot help it. Common sense. That is the defense. Julie does not like that. She steps closer. You think this is funny? I tell her I think it is absurd. She says I can think whatever I want. The fine starts tomorrow. I tell her I have not even put up the fence yet. She says the violation is the survey stake. I tell her the survey stake is not a fence. She says it is an unauthorized structure. I tell her it is a piece of wood. She says the HOA defines structures. I ask where. She taps her laminated template again. I tell her that is not a legal document. She says it is an official HOA notice. I tell her it is a piece of paper she printed at home. She says she did not print it at home. She printed it at the HOA office. I ask where the HOA office is. She says it is confidential. I ask why. She says for security reasons. I tell her that is ridiculous. She says I am being disrespectful. I tell her I am being factual. She says the board will hear about this. I tell her good. I want the board to hear about it. Julie turns and walks toward her car. It is a white SUV with a Brookhaven Greens Reserve Association bumper sticker. She gets in and sits there for a minute typing on her phone. Then, she drives away. I look at the survey stake. It is still there. The orange flag is fluttering in the breeze. I call Marcus. He answers on the first ring. Did you see her last night? He says yes. She was here around 11. She walked up to the side yard and looked around with a flashlight. Then she took pictures. I ask if she touched anything. He says he does not think so. But she was definitely scoping it out. I tell him to send me the video. He says he already did. I check my email. The video is there. I download it and watch it. Julie is wearing the same purple windbreaker. She is holding a flashlight and a phone. She walks up to the property line and stands there for almost 2 minutes, just looking. Then she takes 3 pictures and leaves. I save the video to my phone and back it up to the cloud. I have 30 minutes before my route starts. I need to move fast. I call the contractor. His name is David. He is a local guy who has been doing fences for 20 years. He answers on the second ring. I tell him what happened. He listens, and then he sighs. This is not the first time. Brookhaven Greens loves to pull this. I had another job there last year. They made the homeowner wait 4 months for approval and then denied it because the fence was 6 inches too tall. I ask him if there is any way to speed up the process. He says not through the HOA. But the city does not require a permit for fences under 6 feet as long as they are not on the property line. I tell him the fence I want is exactly 6 feet and it is 2 feet inside the property line. He says then the city does not care. I ask him if the HOA can stop me. He says they can fine me, but they cannot physically stop the work unless they get a court order. I ask how long that takes. He says weeks, maybe months. I ask him if he is willing to start next week anyway. He says he is willing, but I need to know the HOA will come after me. I tell him I know. He says okay. We are on for Monday. I hang up and call my lawyer. Her name is Angela. She does family law, but she has dealt with HOAs before. She answers on the third ring. I explain the situation. She listens and then she asks if I have the covenants. I tell her I have the version from when I bought the house. She asks if the HOA has amended them. I tell her I do not know. She says I need to find out. In Washington, HOAs have to record amendments with the county. If they did not, the amendments are not enforceable. I ask her how I find out. She says I go to the county recorder's office or check online. I tell her I will do that tonight. She says good. She also says I need to get copies of the board meeting minutes for the last 2 years. If the HOA is making up rules on the fly, the minutes will prove it. I ask her how I get the minutes. She says I send a written request to the management company and cite the Washington Homeowners Association Act. If they refuse, I can file a complaint with the state. I tell her I will do that too. She says one more thing. If the HOA tries to fine me, I need to demand a hearing. The bylaw should have a process. If they skip it, the fine is invalid. I thank her and hang up. I check the time. I have 20 minutes. I drive to the county administration building. It is open until 6. I park and run inside. The recorder's office is on the second floor. I tell the clerk I need to see the recorded covenants and amendments for Brookhaven Greens Reserve Association. She asks for the plat name. I give her the name from my title documents. She types into her computer, and then she frowns. There are no amendments on file after 2015. I ask if that means the HOA has not amended the covenants in 10 years. She says it means they have not recorded any amendments in 10 years. They might have amended them, but if they did not record it, it does not count. I ask her if I can get a copy of the covenants. She says yes. It costs $20. I pay, and she prints them. I take the stack of paper and run back to my car. I flip through the covenants while I am sitting in the parking lot. There is a section on fences. It says homeowners may install fences up to 6 feet tall as long as they are not on the property line and do not block access to common areas. There is no mention of HOA approval. There is no mention of aesthetic review. There is no mention of a compliance officer. I take a picture of the fence section and text it to Angela. She responds immediately. That is your smoking gun. If the HOA finds you, you fight it. I text back asking if I should send this to the HOA now. She says no. Save it for the hearing. If you show your hand too early, they will try to amend the covenants before the hearing. I tell her okay. Then I drive to my route. I spend the next 8 hours delivering packages and thinking about the fence. Every time I stop at a red light, I check my phone. Julie has not sent anything. The HOA has not sent anything. But I know it is coming. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA chaos. I get home at 10:30. There is a letter taped to my door. It is from the Brookhaven Greens Reserve Association. It says I am in violation of Covenant Section 12.3. It says I have 72 hours to remove the survey stake, or the HOA will begin daily fines of $500. It says I have the right to request a hearing, but the request must be in writing and submitted within 48 hours. I read the letter 3 times. Then I go inside and write the hearing request. I cite the Washington Homeowners Association Act. I attach the county covenants showing there is no approval requirement. I attach the surveyor's report. I attach the email I sent 3 weeks ago. I attach the contractor quote. I send it to the management company email listed on the original welcome packet I got when I moved in. Then I send a copy to Julie's personal email, which she included on the violation notice. Then I send a copy to every board member whose email I can find on old HOA newsletters. Then I go to bed. The next morning, I wake up to 17 emails. 15 of them are automatic bounce backs. 2 are real. 1 is from the management company. It says my hearing request has been received and the hearing will be scheduled within 30 days. It does not say when. It does not say where. The second email is from Julie. It says I am in violation of HOA policy by sending unsolicited emails to board members. It says I need to stop immediately or I will be fined for harassment. I forward both emails to Angela. She calls me 5 minutes later. They are stalling. 30 days is the maximum allowed under state law. They are hoping you will give up or miss the deadline. I tell her I am not giving up. She says good. She also says the harassment threat is garbage. Sending a hearing request to board members is not harassment. It is transparency. I ask her what I should do. She says ignore the threat. Keep documenting everything. If they try to fine you for harassment, we will crush them in court. I hang up and check the mailbox. There is another letter. This one is from a law firm in downtown Seattle. It is addressed to me. The letterhead is huge. The firm name takes up half the page. The letter says the HOA has retained counsel to pursue immediate injunctive relief to stop me from violating the covenants. It says if I do not remove the survey stake and cancel the fence installation by Monday, the HOA will file for a temporary restraining order. It says I will be responsible for the HOA's legal fees if the restraining order is granted. I read the letter twice. Then I call Angela again. She answers immediately. Did you get a letter from a law firm? I tell her yes. She says send it to me. I take a picture and send it. She is quiet for a minute. Then she says this is a bluff. No judge is going to issue a restraining order over a survey stake. They are trying to scare you. I ask her if I should respond. She says no. Let them file. If they actually go to court, we will show up with the covenants and the surveyor's report, and the judge will laugh them out of the room. I ask her how much that will cost. She says less than backing down. I tell her okay. Monday morning arrives. David the contractor shows up at 8. He has a crew of 3 guys and a truck full of fence panels. Julie shows up at 8:15. She is wearing the same purple windbreaker. She is holding a clipboard. She walks up to David and tells him he cannot work here. David looks at her and then looks at me. I nod. He turns back to Julie. Do you have a stop work order from the city? Julie says she does not need one. She has authority from the HOA. David says the HOA is not a government entity. If she wants to stop the work, she needs a court order. Julie says she does not need a court order. She has a compliance notice. David says a compliance notice is not a court order. Julie says the HOA bylaws give her the authority to stop unauthorized work. David says he does not work for the HOA. He works for me. If she has a problem, she can call the police. Julie pulls out her phone and calls the police. A deputy arrives 20 minutes later. Julie walks up to him before he even gets out of his car. She starts talking fast. She says I am violating HOA rules. She says the contractor does not have permission to be here. She says the work is unsafe. The deputy listens, and then he looks at me. Do you own this property? I tell him yes. He asks if I hired the contractor. I tell him yes. He asks if the contractor has a license. David hands him a business card with his contractor license number. The deputy types it into his phone and waits. Then he nods. You are good. He turns to Julie. The HOA is not law enforcement. If you have a dispute with the homeowner, you need to handle it through your internal process or take it to court. You cannot stop private work on private property without a court order. Julie says the covenants give her authority. The deputy says the covenants are a contract between homeowners. They do not give anyone law enforcement authority. If you keep interfering, I will cite you for obstruction. Julie stares at him. Then she gets in her car and drives away. The deputy stays for another 10 minutes to make sure she does not come back. Then he leaves. David and his crew get to work. By noon, the fence is half done. The posts are in. The panels are going up. It looks good. It is exactly 6 feet tall. It is 2 feet inside the property line. It is straight and level. I take pictures of every stage. I take pictures of the post holes. I take pictures of the concrete. I take pictures of the panels. I take pictures of the measurements. I send everything to Angela. She responds with a thumbs up. At 1, I get a text from Marcus. Check your group chat. I open the neighborhood group chat. There's a message from Julie. It says I am installing an illegal fence without HOA approval. It says the fence is a safety hazard. It says anyone who sees suspicious activity should report it to the management company immediately. The message has 16 replies. Most of them are asking what the safety hazard is. 2 of them are defending me. One of them is from a neighbor named Karen, who says she does not understand why the HOA is making such a big deal about a fence. Another one is from a neighbor named Tom, who says he put up a fence 5 years ago and nobody said anything. Julie replies to Tom and says his fence was grandfathered in. Tom replies and says that is not true. He installed it in 2020 and nobody asked for approval. Julie does not reply to that. At 3, the fence is done. It looks great. David and his crew clean up and load the truck. I pay David and thank him. He shakes my hand and says good luck. Then he drives away. I stand in my yard and look at the fence. It is solid. It is clean. It is exactly what I wanted. I take one more picture and send it to Angela. She responds immediately. Beautiful. Now we wait. I ask her what we are waiting for. She says the HOA's next move. It comes at 5. The email is from the management company. It says I am in violation of Covenant Section 12.3. It says the fence was installed without HOA approval. It says I have 24 hours to remove the fence, or the HOA will begin daily fines of $500. It says I forfeited my right to a hearing by proceeding with the installation. I forward the email to Angela. She calls me immediately. They are doubling down. This is good. The more unreasonable they act, the stronger your case. I ask her if they can actually forfeit my right to a hearing. She says no. The bylaws require a hearing before any fine. If they skip it, the fine is void. I ask her what I should do. She says respond and demand the hearing again. Cite the bylaws. Make them put it in writing that they are denying you due process. I tell her okay. I write the response and send it. Then I wait. The next day I get another email. This one is from Julie. It says the hearing has been scheduled for Friday at 7. It says the hearing will take place at the management company office. It says I have 15 minutes to present my case. It says the board's decision is final. I forward the email to Angela. She says she will be there. I tell her I cannot afford to pay her for a hearing. She says do not worry about it. This one is pro bono. I have been waiting for a case like this. I thank her. Then I spend the rest of the week gathering documents. I print the covenants. I print the surveyor's report. I print the contractor's license. I print the photos of the fence. I print the email thread. I print the doorbell video stills showing Julie on my property at night. I put everything in a binder. I make 3 copies. One for me, one for Angela, and one for the board. Friday arrives. I have to take the afternoon off work. I cannot risk being late. Angela meets me at the management company office at 6:30. The office is in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. There is no sign, just a suite number. We go inside. The waiting room is empty except for 3 folding chairs and a table with old magazines. Julie is already there. She is sitting in one of the chairs. She is wearing the same purple windbreaker. She is holding a folder. She looks at me and smiles. You are late. I check my watch. It is 6:35. I tell her the hearing does not start until 7. She says the board likes people to be early. I sit down. Angela sits next to me. Julie looks at Angela. Who are you? Angela hands her a business card. I am his attorney. Julie frowns. You did not say you were bringing an attorney. I tell her I do not need permission to bring an attorney. Julie says it is not about permission. It is about courtesy. Angela says we are here to ensure due process. Julie says there is no due process issue. This is an HOA hearing, not a trial. Angela says due process applies to HOAs too. Julie does not respond. At 7, a door opens and a man in a suit walks out. He introduces himself as Greg. He is the HOA president. He leads us into a conference room. There are 4 other people sitting at a table. Greg introduces them. Linda is the vice president. Tom is the treasurer. Sarah is the secretary. Julie is the compliance officer. I already know that. Greg sits down and opens a folder. He looks at me. You are here because you installed a fence without HOA approval. I tell him I sent an email 3 weeks before the installation requesting approval. Greg says the email was not in the proper format. I ask what the proper format is. He says written request on HOA letterhead. I ask where I get HOA letterhead. He says the management company. I ask if the management company provides letterhead to homeowners. He says no. I ask how I am supposed to submit a request on HOA letterhead if the management company does not provide it. He says that is not his problem. Angela leans forward. The covenants do not require HOA approval for fences under 6 feet. Greg looks at her. Who are you again? Angela says she is my attorney. Greg says this is not a legal proceeding. Angela says it is a hearing that could result in fines and a lien. That makes it a legal proceeding. Greg says the board has discretion to interpret the covenants. Angela opens her binder and slides a copy of the covenants across the table. Section 8.2 says homeowners may install fences up to 6 feet tall as long as they are not on the property line and do not block access to common areas. There is no mention of HOA approval. Greg reads the page. Then he looks at Julie. Julie says the covenants are outdated. The board amended them in 2018. Angela asks if the amendment was recorded with the county. Julie says it was not necessary. Angela says it absolutely was necessary. In Washington, covenant amendments must be recorded to be enforceable. If the board did not record it, the amendment is void. Greg looks at Tom. Tom looks at Linda. Linda looks at Sarah. Nobody says anything. Angela keeps going. The surveyor's report confirms the fence is 2 feet inside the property line. The contractor is licensed and insured. The fence meets all city codes. There is no violation. Greg says the board disagrees. Angela asks on what basis. Greg says on the basis of aesthetic integrity. Angela asks if the board has written aesthetic standards. Greg says the board uses its judgment. Angela says judgment is not a standard. It is arbitrary enforcement. Greg says the board is not required to justify its decisions to homeowners. Angela says actually, it is. The Washington Homeowners Association Act requires boards to act in good faith and provide notice and an opportunity to be heard. This hearing satisfies the notice requirement, but the decision must be based on the covenants, not personal discretion. Greg says the board stands by its position. Angela says then, we will see you in court. Julie stands up. She is holding her folder. She pulls out a piece of paper. This is a complaint from a neighbor. The neighbor says the fence blocks their view. Angela asks who the neighbor is. Julie says it is confidential. Angela says anonymous complaints are not admissible. Julie says the board does not have to disclose the complainant. Angela says if the board is using the complaint to justify a fine, I have a right to know who made it and cross-examine them. Julie says this is not a courtroom. Angela says it does not matter. Due process requires it. Greg says the board will take the complaint under advisement. Angela says that is not good enough. If the board is going to fine my client, it needs to provide a factual basis. An anonymous complaint is not a factual basis. I pull out my phone. I open the doorbell video and turn it toward the board. This is Julie on my property at 11 at night, 2 days before the fence installation. She was trespassing. Greg looks at the video. Then he looks at Julie. Julie says she was conducting an inspection. I ask if she had my permission. Julie says she does not need permission. She has authority as compliance officer. Angela asks where that authority is written. Julie does not answer. Angela says it is not written anywhere because compliance officers do not have authority to trespass. Julie says she was on HOA common property. I tell her the video shows her standing in my side yard, which is not common property. Julie says the property line is unclear. I tell her the property line is marked by the survey stake she tried to make me remove. Julie says the survey is not official. I tell her the survey was done by a licensed surveyor hired by the title company. Julie says the title company does not manage the HOA. I tell her the title company does not need to manage the HOA. It just needs to confirm property lines, which it did. Greg holds up his hand. Enough. The board will deliberate and issue a decision within 10 business days. Angela says 10 business days is too long. The email said daily fines would start immediately. If the board is going to fine my client, it needs to decide tonight. Greg says the board needs time to review the documents. Angela says the board has had the documents for 5 days. Greg says the board just received new information. Angela asks what new information. Greg points at the doorbell video. Angela says the video is not new information. It is evidence of HOA misconduct. If anything, it supports my client's position. Greg says the board will take it into consideration. Angela says, if the board does not issue a decision tonight, we will file for injunctive relief on Monday. Greg says that is my right. Angela says it is not just my right. It is my obligation. If the board is going to impose fines without a factual basis, I have a duty to protect my client. Greg says the meeting is over. We walk out. Julie follows us into the parking lot. She is holding her phone. She is recording. She walks up to me and says this is not over. I tell her I know. She says the board is going to fine me. I tell her the board can try. She says I am going to lose my house. I tell her that is not how HOA liens work. She says I do not know what I am talking about. I tell her I have done my research. She says research does not matter. The board has the power. I tell her the board has limited power, and if they overstep, they will get sued. She says good luck affording a lawsuit. I tell her my attorney works pro bono. Julie looks at Angela. Angela smiles. Julie turns and walks back inside. Angela and I get in my car. She says that went well. I ask how she can say that. We did not win. She says we did not lose either. The board is stalling because they know they do not have a case. They are hoping we will give up. I ask her if we should file on Monday. She says yes. We file for a declaratory judgment that the fence is compliant and an injunction against the fines. I ask her how long that takes. She says a few weeks, maybe a month. I tell her I do not have a month. I have custody next weekend and I cannot miss it because of an HOA hearing. She says the hearing is over. The next step is court, and court dates are flexible. I tell her okay. Then I drive home. I check my email on Saturday morning. There is a message from the management company. It says the board has reviewed the evidence and determined that I am in violation of Covenant Section 12.3. It says I have been fined $500 per day starting Monday. It says the fine will continue until the fence is removed. It says if I do not pay the fine within 30 days, the HOA will place a lien on my property. It says I have 10 days to appeal. I forward the email to Angela. She responds immediately. They just handed us the case. File Monday morning. Monday morning, Angela files the lawsuit. She also files a motion for a temporary restraining order to stop the fines. The hearing is set for Wednesday. On Tuesday, I get an email from Julie. It says the board has received my lawsuit. It says the board is disappointed that I chose litigation over cooperation. It says the board is prepared to defend its position. It says the HOA will seek attorney fees if I lose. I forward the email to Angela. She says that is a standard threat. Ignore it. Wednesday arrives. The hearing is at 10. Angela meets me at the courthouse. We go through security and find the courtroom. The judge is already on the bench. The HOA's attorney is sitting at the other table. He is wearing a suit that probably costs more than my car. He introduces himself as Richard. Angela introduces herself and me. The judge asks Richard to present the HOA's position. Richard stands up and says the HOA has clear authority to regulate fences under the covenants. He says I installed the fence without approval. He says the fence violates aesthetic standards. He says the HOA has a right to enforce its rules. The judge asks if the covenants require HOA approval for fences. Richard says the board interprets the covenants to require approval. The judge asks where that interpretation is written. Richard says it is in the board minutes. The judge asks if the minutes were provided to homeowners. Richard says the minutes are available upon request. The judge asks if I requested the minutes. Richard says he does not know. Angela stands up. My client requested the minutes multiple times. The HOA refused to provide them. The judge looks at Richard. Richard says the minutes are confidential. The judge says HOA meeting minutes are required to be available to homeowners under Washington law. Richard says the minutes contain privileged information. The judge says then the HOA can redact the privileged information and provide the rest. Richard says the HOA is willing to provide the minutes, but it will take time. The judge asks how much time. Richard says 2 weeks. The judge says, That is too long. This hearing is about a temporary restraining order. The HOA needs to show immediate irreparable harm. Richard says the immediate harm is the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. The judge asks how a fence harms aesthetic integrity. Richard says it blocks sight lines. The judge asks whose sight lines. Richard says the neighbors. The judge asks which neighbors. Richard says he does not have that information. The judge says then there is no irreparable harm. Angela stands up again. Your Honor, the covenants do not require HOA approval for fences under 6 feet. The fence in question is exactly 6 feet tall and 2 feet inside the property line. The surveyor's report confirms it. The city has no objection. The only objection is from the HOA, and the HOA has no legal basis. The judge asks to see the covenants. Angela hands him a copy. He reads for a minute. Then he looks at Richard. The covenants do not mention HOA approval for fences. Richard says the board has implied authority. The judge says implied authority is not enough to fine a homeowner $500 a day. Richard says the board amended the covenants in 2018. The judge asks if the amendment was recorded. Richard says no. The judge says then the amendment is not enforceable. Richard says the homeowners were notified. The judge asks how. Richard says by email. The judge asks if he has proof. Richard says he does not have it with him. The judge says then I am granting the temporary restraining order. The HOA is prohibited from fining the homeowner or placing a lien until this case is resolved. The judge sets a trial date for 6 weeks from now. Then he adjourns. Angela and I walk out of the courtroom. She is smiling. We won. I tell her we won a temporary order. She says that is huge. The HOA cannot touch you until trial, and by then we will have the minutes in the amendment and we will prove they have been making up rules. I ask her what happens if we lose at trial. She says we will not lose. The covenants are on our side. I tell her okay. Then I go back to work. 2 weeks later, I get an email from Marcus. He says Julie has been going door to door telling neighbors that I am suing the HOA and it is going to cost everyone money. He says she is using vague safety language so neighbors assume guilt without reading anything. He says some people are asking questions, but most people are just nodding and agreeing with her. I ask Marcus if he can send me a summary of what she is saying. He says she is saying the fence is unsafe. It blocks emergency access. It violates fire codes. And it is going to result in higher insurance premiums for everyone. I ask him if any of that is true. He says no. The fence is not near any emergency access. It does not block anything. And the HOA's insurance has nothing to do with individual homeowner fences. I ask him if he can talk to the neighbors and correct the record. He says he will try, but Julie is very persuasive. I call Angela and tell her what is happening. She says Julie is defaming you. I ask if I can sue her. She says yes, but it is expensive and time-consuming. A better strategy is to send a cease and desist letter. I ask her to draft one. She sends it the next day. The letter says Julie is making false statements about me and the fence. It says if she does not stop, I will sue her for defamation. It says I am also considering a complaint to the state bar if the HOA's attorney is encouraging this behavior. I send the letter to Julie by certified mail. She signs for it on Thursday. Friday morning, I get a call from Greg, the HOA president. He says he wants to settle. I ask what the terms are. He says the HOA will drop the fines and the lien if I agree to remove the fence. I tell him no. He says the HOA will pay for the removal. I tell him no. He says the HOA will pay for a new fence if I agree to submit plans for approval first. I tell him I already have a fence and it is staying. He says the board is willing to compromise. I ask what the compromise is. He says the HOA will approve the fence retroactively if I agree to pay a processing fee. I ask how much. He says $2,000. I tell him that is not a compromise. That is extortion. He says it is a reasonable administrative fee. I tell him there is no administrative work because the fence does not require approval. He says the board disagrees. I tell him the judge disagrees. He says the judge issued a temporary order. The trial is still pending. I tell him the trial is going to go badly for the HOA. He says we will see. Then he hangs up. I call Angela and tell her about the settlement offer. She says they are panicking. They know they are going to lose. I ask her if we should settle. She says absolutely not. If we settle, it sets a precedent that the HOA can shake down homeowners and get away with it. I tell her okay. Then I ask her if she thinks they will drop the case before trial. She says maybe. But we need to be prepared to go all the way. I tell her I am ready. 3 days before trial, I get an email from a neighbor I have never met. Her name is Linda. She says she is the HOA vice president. She says she has been reviewing the HOA's financial records, and she found something disturbing. She says there are multiple invoices from the HOA's attorney that do not match the work described. She says it looks like Julie has been authorizing legal fees without board approval. She says she confronted Julie, and Julie said the fees were for compliance work. Linda says she asked to see the work and Julie refused. Linda says she is resigning from the board and she thinks I should know. She attaches a spreadsheet. I open it. There are over 20 invoices from the HOA's attorney over the past 2 years. Most of them are labeled general compliance or covenant enforcement. The total is over $40,000. I forward the email to Angela. She calls me immediately. This is a management company invoice trail showing bogus legal fees were added without authorization. This is your trump card. I ask her what we do with it. She says we use it to trigger an internal audit, and the board panics in real time. Angela files a motion to compel the HOA to produce all financial records related to legal fees. The judge grants it. The HOA has 72 hours to comply. On the third day, the HOA's attorney files a motion to withdraw from the case. He says there is a conflict of interest. The judge asks what the conflict is. The attorney says he cannot disclose it because it is privileged. The judge says if he is withdrawing 3 days before trial, he needs to provide a reason. The attorney says the HOA has not paid his bills. The judge asks how much the HOA owes. The attorney says $60,000. The judge looks at the HOA's attorney and then looks at Greg, who is sitting in the gallery. Greg stands up and says the HOA is disputing the bills. The judge says that is between the HOA and the attorney. The attorney is granted leave to withdraw. The trial is continued for 2 weeks to give the HOA time to find new counsel. The next day, I get an email from Tom, the HOA treasurer. He says the board held an emergency meeting. He says they reviewed the financial records and found that Julie authorized over $50,000 in legal fees without board approval. He says the board voted to remove Julie from the compliance officer position and ban her from contacting homeowners outside official meetings. He says the board is also launching an internal audit. He says the board wants to settle my case. He says the HOA will drop all fines, remove all liens, and pay my attorney fees. He says the HOA will also issue a memo clarifying the rule Karen weaponized. I forward the email to Angela. She says take the deal. I tell her I want an apology. She says ask for it. I reply to Tom and say I want a public apology at the next HOA meeting. Tom says the board will discuss it. 2 days later, I get another email from Tom. He says the board has agreed to issue a public apology. He says the apology will be read at the next HOA meeting and posted on the HOA website. He also says the board completed the audit. He says Julie used HOA funds to pay for personal legal expenses unrelated to HOA business. He says the board is referring the matter to the police. He asks if I am willing to settle. I tell Angela. She says yes. I reply and say yes. Tom sends settlement documents the next day. Angela reviews them. She says they are clean. I sign them. The case is dismissed. The HOA meeting is on Thursday night. Angela and I show up. The meeting room is packed. Every chair is full. People are standing against the walls. Julie is sitting in the back corner. She is wearing the same purple windbreaker. She is not wearing the tiny body camera. Greg stands up and reads the apology. He says the board made an error in interpreting the covenants. He says my fence is compliant. He says the fines were improper. He says the board apologizes. He says the HOA is implementing new policies to prevent this from happening again. Then he sits down. Someone in the audience raises their hand and asks if the board is going to address the missing money. Greg says the matter is under investigation. Someone else asks if Julie is going to be charged. Greg says that is up to the police. Someone else asks if the HOA is going to recover the money. Greg says the board is exploring all options. Julie stands up. She starts to say something. Greg interrupts her and says she is not recognized. Julie says she has a right to speak. Greg says she forfeited that right when she violated her fiduciary duty. Julie says she did not violate anything. Greg says the audit shows otherwise. Julie says the audit is flawed. Greg says the board disagrees. Julie says she wants to address the homeowners. Greg says the board has already voted. Karen tries to interrupt, and the meeting votes anyway. The board votes to issue a memo clarifying the rule Karen weaponized. The memo is posted on the HOA website the next day. It says fences under 6 feet do not require HOA approval as long as they comply with the covenants. It says homeowners who were fined for non-compliant fences under the old interpretation can request a refund. It says the compliance officer position is suspended pending further review. A week later, I get a letter from the police. It says they have completed their investigation. It says Julie is being charged with theft and fraud. It says the HOA is cooperating. It says I may be called as a witness. I call Angela and tell her. She says good. Justice is being served. I ask her if Julie is going to jail. She says probably not. White-collar crimes usually result in probation and restitution. But it will be on her record. I tell her that is enough. 2 weeks later, I run into Julie at the USPS mailbox cluster curb. She is holding a clipboard. She tries to walk past me, but I step in her way. I ask her if she has anything to say. She says no. I tell her she cost me thousands of dollars and weeks of stress. She says I cost the HOA even more. I tell her the HOA cost itself by letting her run wild. She says I do not know what I am talking about. I tell her the police disagree. She pulls out her phone and starts recording. I tell her to put the phone away. She says she has a right to record. I tell her she has a right to record in public, but this is harassment. A deputy pulls up. Julie walks up to him and says I am threatening her. The deputy asks what I said. Julie says I told her to put her phone away. The deputy looks at me. I tell him Julie has been harassing me for months, and I just asked her to leave me alone. The deputy looks at Julie. He says the HOA is not law enforcement. If she has a problem with me, she needs to take it to court. Julie says she already did. The deputy says then the matter is resolved. Julie says it is not resolved. The deputy says it is as far as he is concerned. He tells Julie to step back. Julie does not move. The deputy says if she does not step back, he will cite her for obstruction. Julie steps back. The deputy looks at me and asks if I need anything else. I tell him no. He drives away. Julie gets in her car and leaves. A month later, I get an email from Tom. He says the HOA held a special election. He says Greg resigned as president. He says Linda resigned as vice president. He says the new board is committed to transparency and accountability. He says they are reviewing all HOA policies. He says they want to hear from homeowners. He attaches a survey. I fill it out. I suggest the HOA hire a professional management company instead of relying on volunteers. I suggest the HOA post meeting minutes online within 48 hours. I suggest the HOA eliminate all vague enforcement language from the covenants. I suggest the HOA require board approval for any legal fees over $1,000. I hit submit. 2 months later, the HOA website is updated. The minutes are posted. The bylaws are posted. The financial reports are posted. There is a new section for homeowner resources. There is a link to request documents. There is a phone number for the new management company. I call the number. A woman answers. She says her name is Rachel. She is the new community manager. I tell her I am a homeowner. She says she is here to help. I ask if the HOA has any pending complaints against me. She checks the system. She says no. My account is clear. I thank her and hang up. I walk outside and look at my fence. It is still standing. It is still solid. It is still exactly 6 feet tall. It is still 2 feet inside the property line. It is exactly what I wanted. I sit down in my yard and open my phone. I check the HOA group chat. There are no messages from Julie. There are no messages about fences. There are no messages about violations. There is a message from Marcus. It says the new board is doing a good job. There is a message from Tom. It says he is glad things are improving. There is a message from Karen. It says she appreciates the transparency. I close my phone and lean back. I look at the fence one more time. Then I smile. Karen's complaint is ruled unfounded with evidence cited. The HOA issues a memo clarifying the rule Karen weaponized. A policy clarification that destroys Karen's favorite tactic is now posted on the website for everyone to see. I do not know what happened to Julie after the charges were filed. I do not care. I have my fence. I have my peace. I have my custody weekends without HOA delays. That is all that matters. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.